Hello and welcome to Crushing Comics. I'm your host Peter and we are here to fall in love with my comic collection all over again. I've got my X-Men shirt on today because I'm hoping we're going to unwrap a big bundle of some X-Men comic book that I love. Let's see. Oh my gosh, this is a big one. You know, I've been giving some thought recently to, like, what is it about the X-Men, really? What is it about them that was so attractive to me and so many attractive to many people and is so unique in comic books? And there's the hated and feared part. There's them as the allegory for minorities. But there's also the X-Men as family, and like the idea that all of them were connected to and knew each other in some way, or ought to. And there was never there's no combination that's too weird of any X-Men characters, because they're all part of the same continuity, not only story continuity, but family continuity of mutants. And if you think back to reading comics in the late 80s and early 90s, nobody else was really doing that. I guess maybe like Legion of Superheroes had that sort of like huge cast being contained. Justice League was much more like Avengers in that they were just like all these big heroes kind of coming and going without an inherent connection. Fantastic Four was really just the four of them. It's really hard to think of another franchise that had a similar feeling. And that feeling of being apart but also belonging, I think, was a big aspect of X-Men's popularity, especially with adolescents, because, look, no matter how privileged or popular or happy you are in general, there's always something about your adolescent brain chemistry that's telling you that, like, you feel apart and you just want to feel like you are apart instead of apart. And the X-Men appeals to that thing. So I was just thinking about, like, why is it that my collection is so much X-Men, and why in the 90s, like, I dabbled in tons of stuff. I had a ton of Image. I love Image. Maybe that'll be a future series, because not that much of it's collected, but I own all of Wildstorm. I loved Wonder Woman. You know, I liked a lot of other comic books, but not like I loved the X-Men. And I'm always, like, trying to interrogate that and try to figure it out a little bit. I think it has to do with just not only the themes, but the nature of the cast just wasn't something you can get from a lot of other comic books. Oh, and I did unwrap a hunk of X-Men! Yay! Oh, yay! Okay, this is gonna be fun. Sure, it was good luck. Okay. Wow. Okay. So, X-Men... This is X-Men Origins 1 and 2. Actually an interesting continuation of where we left off in the last episode with the Wolverine origin stories, which kind of like went back and told a Wolverine story we had never seen. This is not quite that. These are a series of one-shots that told kind of perfectly encapsulated origins of a series of X-Men characters. The first one, Jean Grey, Beast, Colossus, Wolverine, Sabretooth, and Gambit. The second one, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Iceman, Emma Frost, and Deadpool. Now, clearly some of those are a little bit more interesting than others because some of them haven't been explored and some of them it's really compelling to want to see their early life. Like Iceman, especially because this was pre the revelation of Iceman coming out as gay, like, do we care about seeing Iceman, like, who's like a 14-year-old kid before he shows up in X-Men 1? But some of them, like Gambit, are a little bit more interesting because it was a character who was a little bit more opaque to us. So Marvel was kind of into this for a little while, these kind of like explain the history of character one-shot sort of deals. They did it with Avengers and they called it something different, like Avengers, maybe it was Avengers Origins or Avengers Mythos or something. But I think the attraction in these stories is that they were written by a really interesting group of people. So Colossus by Chris Yost, who's always great. Jean Grey by Sean McKeever. Shame he's not really writing for Marvel anymore. Beast by Mike Carey, who's one of my favorite Marvel writers. Sabretooth by Kieran Gillen. We know my feelings on him. Wolverine by Yost again. Gambit by Carey. This one doesn't break it out issue by issue. Stuart Moore, Roberto Aguirre, I can never say his name, Aguirre Sacasa, who I think might be the showrunner on the Sex and Murder Archie now. Valerie Durazio, Adam Freeman, Mark Bernardin, and Dwayne Szarski. So this one doesn't quite have the pedigree of the first one. Interesting stuff. I've not read every one of them. I've read some of them. I think it's fun. I think these tend to be like a short-term cash grab for Marvel, and they don't tend to get a lot of useful stuff done in them. It's rare that the author is given the chance to establish anything really meaningful rather than just kind of like recapping things that we know with some connective tissue. So it's not the same as Wolverine Origins in that sense, but it's interesting, it's fun. I think it would be cool if they had run it as an ongoing series that was committed to doing like 12 or 24 issues and really went through the origins of all their characters to give us these like tidy one-issue versions of them. Like, how did they do 2 of these and not do Storm? I mean, I guess Storm has had kind of her own origin miniseries that precludes needing to go back, but so do a lot of these other characters. So, I don't know. I get a little frustrated when Marvel kind of just like tosses off these one-off type things and you're expected to just like buy them and read them. They don't really have like a connection. Not that every comic book has to connect to everything else, but you know, when you look back now like 5 years later and you're like, should I read this book? The answer is kind of like, yeah, because it doesn't really have anything to do with anything. It's not being referenced. It just kind of exists out in space. Oh boy. Okay, so this is called X-Men the Asgardian Wars. And it's a very brief run of issues from the 190s era of X-Men. They fit in like right before X-Men 200, Uncanny X-Men 200, I think. So it's X-Men Alpha Flight 1 and 2, and then New Mutants Special Edition, and X-Men Annual 9. These are partially remarkable because, well, Claremont wrote them all, so he wrote everything X-Men, but the artists are Paul Smith and Arthur Adams, both very well-known, very well-loved X-Men artists of the period, and Art Adams doesn't really do a lot of long runs of stuff. His art is so intricate that he's somebody who shows up for like an annual or an issue, and then he pieces out. So, like, he's revered. Everybody loves to have his art in any format, especially an oversized format. And this was of a period where Marvel really was understanding how to fracture and market X-Men to a wider selection of books. We had New Mutants at this point. We had the Wolverine miniseries. We were just about to start X-Factor. And we're a while yet away still from Wolverine and from Excalibur. And this was like also a rare connection between X-Men and Alpha Flight, because even though Alpha Flight was born out of X-Men, it kind of just did its own thing. And aside from a very occasional pop-in by Wolverine, which I think actually happens just after this, it's very separate and it's not really an X book at all. So this was actually one of the earlier X-Men oversized hardcovers. This was printed in 2009. So now, oh, another really great debossed cover. This has the name at the bottom there. If Marvel had to do it all over again, I don't know that they would issue this book. First of all, 4 issues in an oversized book, that's just weird. Second of all, this is part really that fits into a longer X-Men run, and it just doesn't make sense by itself. Like, it's not like, yeah, it's got Loki on it, but like, why does it have to exist on its own? It's not like it has that strong of a marketing pool as its own thing. And like, it's not like people are buying it just because it has Alpha Flight in it. Why not make this part of a run that also shows what was happening in Uncanny X-Men, since it's also by Claremont? And Marvel eventually is going to hit up at a point that it's going to put that into another book. At some point, they're going to do Uncanny X-Men Volume 4 or 5, or just call them by names and not do 4 or 5, and that book is going to wind up in one of these additional volumes because it's included in that run as it passes by. The same is somewhat true for this. Now, this is really classic. X-Men Mutant Massacre. I want to say that this was the first X-Men oversized hardcover. Also from 2009. So this is kind of slim. Mutant Massacre was an interesting event. It was an indirect crossover, like you didn't have to continue from one book to the next book, but all of the books kind of like connected, and some of them were like to the side of other ones, which actually makes it kind of straight. Yeah, here's the map. I love this. Like, what a funny little artifact of the time, right? So you can like follow the X-Men through the arrows and the pipelines and watch them connect. Mutant Massacre was a big X-Men story, both at the time and still really to this day for a few different reasons. The main one of which is it's Angel losing his wings to the Marauders as they slaughter the Morlocks who live in the tunnels under New York City. And we still get Morlock themes to this day. The Marauders wound up being connected to Mr. Sinister, we find out in Inferno, and so there's still themes of Mr. Sinister and Marauders to this day. Angel, of course, never was the same and was for the better. Eventually, as an outcome of this, we see his transformation to Archangel at the hands of Apocalypse, which is in the next big event from here, Fall of the Mutants. And also, this is where Kitty Pryde, I think, gets injured and winds up leaving and going to Excalibur, it's where Psylocke joins the team in an amazing issue. One of the best single issues of X-Men I could name. Like, if I was making you a list of the top 10 issues of X-Men, this would be in the list. Psylocke faces off against Sabretooth. And this is not Ninja Psylocke. This is pre the yellow washing of Psylocke. Here's the cover. It's Alan Davis. And oh my gosh, I know it's got Wolverine and Sabretooth on the front, but Psylocke plays a big, big role in this fight as well. And it's just an unbelievably great issue. And then the next issue is the issue that Dazzler joins the X-Men, and we all know how much I love Dazzler, so I remember sitting in my attic and I'm wrapping this and reading it. It was like right at the beginning. I guess probably just bought the Wolverine omnibus and decided, like, okay, I guess we're doing this oversized thing with X-Men. What's out there? And this was one of the ones that was out there. It was only like a year and a half old at that point. I'm like, all right, let's go. And I bought it and read it. And I had most of these issues at the time, so this is not one of those times that I couldn't have access to something. These issues, they were expensive at the time, but they weren't like $20, $30 books the way some of the Fall of the Mutants issues were. They were like $4 or $5 books, and there's not a ton of them. The whole thing is 5 issues of X-Men, 3 issues of X-Factor, 1 issue of New Mutants, 2 issues of Thor, Power Pack, and Daredevil. And but it was really fun to read it all in one. The art is restored really well, and great book. Now here's the thing. Is Marvel going to collect around this little Tiddlywinks book as they finally approach this era with Uncanny X-Men omnibuses? I don't think they will. I think this is going to get swallowed up into another book. It's only an OHC. It's not that many issues. And the only gap left in color-collected X-Men from the Claremont period is the gap that's directly after this run. Starting with Uncanny X-Men 215, they don't get picked up again until Fall of the Mutants, which starts on either 219 or 220, but there's also some annuals and miniseries in that little block. So at some point, Marvel's going to do a omnibus that's like before the Fall of the Mutants or after the Massacre or whatever the heck they want to call it, that's really beneficial if it would just start from here and then go all the way to there. Now, directly preceding this, is it out on the shelf yet? It's not. Directly preceding this is X-Men Ghosts, which collects from 200 or 199 to 209. So that hasn't been an oversized yet. So this is great, and a book I really love. Of course, really hard to find now. I think Marvel maybe reissued it in a trade paperback, but it's a great read, and it's really the beginning of the splintering of the X-Men. Like, they all are thrown to the winds after this. And so this is one of the last times you get to see the whole team before Claremont really starts to splinter them. I'm actually going to end here. We will pick up this next book in the next episode because I hear some people coming into the house and it's going to be an explosion of noise. So let's just do the ceremonial shelving of some X-Men books I got on my wish because I wore my X-Men shirt. So here they are. I'm going to put them in this X-Men block right here, because they all come after. Actually, we could put the origin ones on this side. There you go. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tune in next time to hear me explain what is this giant size X-Men book and why is it so big if there was only the one big giant size X-Men in 1975. Thanks so much for tuning in, and this has been Crushing Comics.